Light Yagami is one of the most prolific serial killers in the history of fiction, and he came very close to accomplishing his goal of becoming the new god of his world. The back and forth between Kira and L was one for the ages, and was arguably the best chess match between detective and criminal we've ever seen throughout all of television. But today, I'll be inserting a different fictional character in L's place. Could Will Graham from the TV series Hannibal solve the Kira case? Could he help catch Light Yagami and bring him to justice for all of his heinous actions? Or would Will Graham become yet another name written on the deadly pages of the Death Note? Will Graham is a really fascinating character to discuss because his ability to recreate crimes in his head is not only super impressive, but also sort of borders on the line of being a supernatural capability. Like, I know the series Hannibal is mostly quite grounded, and I imagine it's meant to take place in the quote-unquote real world, but how well Will is able to visualize everything and just immediately lock onto people being killers after just briefly encountering them is absolutely crazy. So having this ability that may very well be on the level of a superpower or something supernatural would potentially be vital to Will's chances of solving the Kira investigation. Light Yagami, as anyone who has watched or read Death Note would know, is a literal super genius. He is the smartest student in his class by far, and is only intellectually challenged by like 2 or 3 people throughout his run as Kira. Add onto his ridiculously high IQ, a literal superpowered notebook that can kill anyone whose face he has seen as long as he has their name, and Light Yagami becomes an antagonist that is extremely difficult to stop. However, his one glaring weakness is his ego. L and Nier were both able to exploit his egotistical nature at multiple steps along the way, and said ego ultimately resulted in his death, and just as he was one step away from truly becoming a god. Ultimately, this battle becomes a matter of how far Will Graham's borderline supernatural intuition will go. Like, if he were to go to where one of Kira's victims died of a heart attack, how much would he really be able to see? Would Mr. Graham close his eyes and see the criminal dying of a heart attack and someone writing something in a notebook? Or would he only see the person dying of the heart attack? I think there's a decent argument for both because typically when Will has these sort of mental recreations, he is usually in the position of the perpetrator. Will says things like, "It's my design, then I shoot." Essentially, he relives the killing through the shoes of whoever was responsible. So would Will see himself in Light's room with a notebook in hand as he writes the criminal's name down? Ultimately, I'm inclined to say no. Historically, the killer has had to at least been present when the victim died in order for Will to have one of his visions. And I just think it's too big of a stretch to say that Will could intuition his way into seeing the Death Note in his mind. At best, I could maybe see Will being able to decipher that these criminals were killed by someone who wasn't present. And if we grant Will this feat, which I do think is at least semi-realistic, given how unrealistic his ability is at times, then Will and his investigative team could potentially set up a similar trap as L did, with the whole fake person on TV, so there is a potential path for Will Graham to realize that Kira needs a name and a face in order to kill. However, there's a big issue at play. Will Graham is not nearly as smart as L, and it's frustrating to have to say this in almost every video I make about Light Yagami versus a different fictional detective. But L was, 1, a super genius equal to, if not superior to Light in every way, and 2, was willing to work outside of the law in order to push Kira into corners. Will Graham largely lacks this ability and willingness. Like, yes, if you're extremely generous to Will and allow him to visualize Light in the act of writing the names of criminals, sure, he'd be able to clock onto Light and realize he's Kira. But if we're being honest and fair, that's probably a bit extreme. Yes, his autistic mental powers border on the supernatural, but they are at least somewhat grounded in the tiniest bit of realism. So to grant Will all of this, in my opinion, is not a fair assessment of these two combatants. Will Graham could probably narrow down his search for Kira and potentially help his investigative team realize that Kira needs a name and face in order to kill, but I believe this is precisely where his luck would run out. Even if he could keep his anonymity from Light and avoid having his name written in the death note, I just don't see a pathway for Will Graham to actually successfully catch Light Yagami. If you place him on the Kira investigative team with L present, then I do think Will could suss Light out and would be on board with L's theories. But that's not really a true Will versus Light scenario. It becomes more of a could Will Graham piggyback off of L and get carried to a victory. And listen, I don't like rewarding Light Yagami with all of these victories in the videos I make about him. As someone stated in a comment on my Death Note review video, I have a quote-unquote hate boner for Light Yagami, which I think is totally natural. He is an antagonist and I hate everything he stands for. But at the end of the day, he is a super genius and has a super-powered notebook. That is a combination that is extremely hard to defeat. So all in all, I firmly believe Will Graham could not solve the Kira case and catch Light Yagami. Well, if you made it this far, I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this. Who do you think would win this clash of fictional characters with supernatural abilities? Light Yagami or Will Graham? I've made a few versus-style videos like this, and a playlist with all of them will be linked in the description. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please feel free to drop a like and subscribe for more Screen Stories content. Thank you for watching, and until next time, peace.